Joe Simmons is a 25-year-old employed as a looper for a mafia organization in Kansas City. Joe's superior, Abe, was sent back in time to oversee the loopers, and also operates a nightclub where Joe regularly visits and socializes with Susie, a showgirl. Abe also commands the Gat Men, his muscle, headed by Kid Blue. The Gat Men are known for their Magnum revolvers, which possess greater range and accuracy than a looper's blunderbuss shotgun, which is designed specifically for close-range encounters. During a night out at the club, one of the loopers announces that he has just finished closing his loop, leading to a significant payout in gold and cause for celebration. As Joe and his fellow loopers continue to carry out their duties, they begin to observe a rise in the frequency of loop closures. During one evening, Seth, who is a friend of Joe's and a fellow looper, visits him in a state of panic. Seth explains that he was supposed to close his own loop but found himself unable to do so, after his victim started singing a lullaby his mother had once sung to him. Seth realizes that the person he was meant to kill was actually his future self. He further reveals that a new crime boss, known as the Rainmaker, has risen to power in the future, and is causing widespread chaos and destruction. Moments later, the Gat Men arrive at Joe's residence, prompting him to hide Seth in his apartment's floor safe. The Gat Men suspect that Joe is harboring Seth, and take him to Abe for questioning. Abe presents Joe with an ultimatum: if he gives up Seth, he will be set free. Alternatively, if Joe refuses, they cannot kill him as it will have an adverse impact on the future, but they will make his life extremely difficult by taking half of the silver he has been saving for his retirement in France. Joe quickly surrenders Seth to Abe. In addition to this, Abe advises Joe not to go to France but to travel to China instead, claiming that he has knowledge of the future. Old Seth attempts to climb over a barbed wire fence but notices scars appearing on his arm, spelling out words telling him to go to a specific address. Ignoring the message, he loses one finger, then another, and the tip of his nose is cut off. Old Seth then receives a message to go to the given address and heads there, losing his feet along the way. He crawls to the door and bangs on it, but Kid Blue shoots him upon opening. Young Seth is seen alive on a table where his body parts are being chopped off, and a ventilator is heard. Meanwhile, Joe continues to work as a looper, visiting a diner and learning French after each killing. One day, his victim arrives without a bag over his head, and Joe realizes it's his older self. Joe attempts to shoot him, but old Joe uses the gold on his back to deflect the bullet and knocks out Joe with a punch. During the altercation, Joe is served by a waitress named Beatrix. Joe wakes up and discovers a note urging him to leave town, but instead, he heads back to his apartment, where he catches the Gat Men ransacking it and stealing his silver. Joe traps Kid Blue in his floor safe but gets shot by another Gat Man, causing him to fall from his fire escape and lose consciousness. Flashbacks reveal how Joe got to this point. He closed his loop and moved to Shanghai as instructed by Abe. The story jumps ahead 30 years, and we see that Joe retired comfortably, but his drug addiction quickly depleted his savings, forcing him to return to a life of crime. He meets a compassionate woman who helps him overcome his addiction, and they eventually get married. Things are going well until he is captured and sent back in time to be killed. Joe manages to escape, kill his captors, and flee in the time machine. The previous events are shown as old Joe uses Joe's truck to escape, buys medical supplies, and rushes to Joe's apartment. He saves young Joe after he falls from the balcony onto a car, and then disappears once again. Old Joe goes to the library, and while looking up some cryptic numbers, letters begin to appear on his hand and arm spelling out Beatrix. Later, he meets young Joe at a diner, and they both order the same meal. Old Joe asks Joe about his French lessons, then says in French that he knows Joe has a gun pointed at him, under the table. When young Joe doesn't understand, old Joe tells him not to worry, he will understand soon. Old Joe goes on to explain that the Rainmaker appeared out of nowhere, and took control of all major crime syndicates within 6 months. The Rainmaker is responsible for mass executions, and ordered the closing of all loops. Old Joe's wife was killed accidentally, when old Joe was captured, and shortly before this, old Dale gave him a numerical sequence that hints at finding the Rainmaker. Old Joe knows that in Joe's present, the Rainmaker is a child living in the same county with a synthetic jaw, and who witnessed the killing of his mother. If old Joe can kill the Rainmaker, then he never would be captured, and his wife would still be alive. Old Joe and young Joe engage in a scuffle when old Joe realizes that young Joe still plans to kill him. Both of them notice that the diner has emptied out, with staff and customers disappearing. Suddenly, Gatmen barge in. Old Joe gives young Joe a piece of a map with an address marked on it, and a string of digits, telling him that the Rainmaker might be living there. The Gatmen open fire on both Joes as Old Joe runs away. Young Joe manages to escape, and follows the coordinates to a farmhouse owned by Sarah, who lives with her son, Sid. When young Joe shows Sarah the map, she recognizes the digits as Sid's birth date, and the serial number of the hospital where he was born. Young Joe explains the situation about the Rainmaker, and Sarah proves to be knowledgeable about loopers, and how they operate. The database that Old Joe used with the string of digits produced 3 potential children born on the same day in the same hospital, and Old Joe is determined to kill them all. Sarah tells Sid to stay away from young Joe, but Sid is curious, and befriends him. Sid even shows young Joe some of the electronic gear he is tinkering with and builds transmitters, so they can communicate with each other. Young Joe is impressed with the advanced work that the 5-year-old is doing. Old Joe finds one of the potential Rainmaker children en route to a birthday party and kills him. But when he realizes that he still exists in his past, he breaks down in tears, since he killed the wrong child. He then heads to the other child's location, but is hesitant when he discovers that it is where his former girlfriend, Susie, now lives with her son. Rather than killing the child immediately, he watches their apartment. Meanwhile, as young Joe and Sarah grow closer, he learns that Sarah is a telekinetic, with slightly greater power than the other TKs. Sid, her son, was raised by Sarah's sister for 2 years, before she died under mysterious circumstances. Sid believes that Sarah's sister was his real mother, and doesn't believe that Sarah is his true parent. Sarah is afraid of Sid and seeks refuge in her room and a safe, when Sid gets angry and accuses her of lying about being his mother. The following day, Jesse, one of the Gatmen, searches for Joe. Sid aids Joe's escape, and Jesse departs. While hiding from Jesse, Joe reveals to Sid how he was abandoned by his mother and raised by the panhandlers. He shares how being motherless caused him to become a killer and drug addict. Jesse grows suspicious of Sarah, and returns to hold her at gunpoint. Sid comes down the stairs and startles Jesse, causing Sid to fall and enter a telekinetic rage. Jesse is killed by Sid's blast, and his blood rains out of his chest, hence coining the name Rainmaker. Sid's extraordinary abilities confirm that he is indeed the Rainmaker and that his powers were responsible for killing Sarah's sister. Joe finds Sid in the sugarcane fields, sobbing, and comforts him. Sarah reminds Joe that the boy needs love and support, to avoid becoming the Rainmaker if raised in a nurturing home. Meanwhile, Kid Blue tracks down Old Joe to Susie's apartment and captures him, when he attempts to break in and kill the child. Young Joe warns Sarah and Sid to escape, anticipating that their farm may be targeted by his employers, or Old Joe. However, Old Joe manages to break free and kills Abe and all the Gatmen, except for Kid Blue, who is shot in the foot. As Old Joe and Young Joe face off near Sarah's house, Kid Blue attacks and is killed by Young Joe. Sarah and Sid try to flee in a truck, but Old Joe starts shooting at them. Sid panics and uses his telekinetic powers to flip the truck, injuring himself and Sarah. They try to hide in the sugarcane fields while Old Joe continues to pursue them, shooting at them. Sid's rage escalates and he suspends Sarah and Old Joe in the air with a blast of his telekinetic powers. Joe, who had been following Old Joe, is knocked over by the blast. Sarah manages to calm Sid down, and he calls her mom, for the first time, showing Joe that Sid can be controlled. Old Joe tries to shoot Sid, but Sarah shields him and is fatally shot. Sid witnesses his mother's death, and escapes through the fields, boarding a slow-moving freight train. In a flashback, young Joe realizes that by killing Sarah and wounding Sid, Old Joe creates the bitter child who will become the Rainmaker, without his mother's love. He also understands that killing Old Joe will not close the loop, and so he turns his gun on himself, thus closing the loop from his end. Old Joe disappears almost instantly. After taking care of Sid's wound caused by Old Joe's gunshot, Sarah tenderly tucks him into bed. She later heads back to the sugarcane field where she discovers gold bars scattered on the ground, near the overturned truck, which Old Joe had taken from Abe's headquarters. The gold bars will ensure that she and Sid will be financially stable. She approaches young Joe's lifeless body lying in the field, and lovingly strokes his hair, an act he had previously revealed to Susie that his mother used to do for him. And that's all for this recap. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.